And now a message from our friends at Fetching Food.
The 1970s and 80s had elbow, gravy train, Purina, Meow Mix, and bell bottoms. You've changed your clothes, now change how you feed your pet. Like bell bottoms, kick the kibble and join us in the 21st century with the healthiest diet for dogs and cats. Feed naturally, feed raw, feed Fetching Food.
Gobble, 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 gobble.
Let's do the turkey dinner dance. Come on, let's go. Join right in and follow me. You can do it fast or slow. Turkey to the left, cha-cha-cha. Turkey to the right, cha-cha-cha. Turkey up and turkey down. Turkey all around. Suing gravy to the left, cha-cha-cha. Suing gravy to the right, cha-cha-cha. Suing gravy up and down. Suing gravy all around. Mashed potatoes to the left, cha-cha-cha. Mashed potatoes to the right, cha-cha-cha. Mashed potatoes up and down. Mashed potatoes all around. Pumpkin pie to the left, cha-cha-cha. Pumpkin pie to the right, cha-cha-cha. Pumpkin pie up and down. Pumpkin pie all around. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Gobble, 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 gobble.
How much time do we have, Professor?
Well, according to my calculations, the robots won't go berserk for at least 24 hours. Oh, I've got to carry the water.
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled and informative episode of the Grimmer Next Door podcast. I am your host, Chris Green, and join us this week is an amazing man. He has done more in his early years than I have in my entire life, and I'm very honored to be able to say I was able to sit down and talk to this great mind. We have Dr. Pete Scheifele on the podcast, and he's going to tell us all about his amazing research, and it is just, oh my gosh. He is, I will honestly say, I fanboyed, and you will notice it very clearly in this podcast. But before we get to that, let's go into our fun fact of the week. Dogs have around 18 muscles in each ear, which is odd because cats have more. Thought that was a little strange. They can hear about 4 times better than humans. When a dog tilts their head, it may have to do with their hearing. Dogs' ears are not only used for hearing, they're key elements of body language. Usually in humans, it's just one finger. But in dogs, they are so much more unique and wonderful than a lot of humans, as we all can tell. Well, by that sound, Dr. Scheifele is about to enter the podcast studio, so with that said, welcome Dr. Scheifele to the podcast, and I am going to fanboy now.
Oh, hello. Hold on a sec. Dad, we have a guest on the podcast.
This week on the podcast, we are joined by an amazing doctor who is one of the most intelligent and respected men in the medical community. You are doing a massive amount of work, but I want to always, go into your full body of work. This week we have Dr. Pete Scheifele, on the podcast, and I'm so honored to be able to have this conversation with you.
The honor is all mine.
Well, you have started in so many different things, but I want to know how you did the transition from the beginning of life to decide, you know what, I want to be a scientist. I want to work in the research for animals. How did that all come about?
I guess a lot of it came from my years of service in the Navy, my last 10 years, I became a naval oceanographer. So I was doing a lot of research work and a lot of work with marine mammals and other animals, and it kind of took over my life and became a full-time thing.
That's probably, it's funny because, it's weird how the aha moment comes in. You're like, oh, this is what I want to do. Now, when you say you were in the Navy, you're kind of underselling it. You were a submarine driver during Vietnam. I mean, that is by far amazing in itself. Can you kind of take us through that? What was that like?
Well, I don't know. I enlisted to actually go on submarines when I was 17 because I was going to be graduating from high school, and I knew that that time the draft was on. And I wanted to do something that, had a lot of technology to it. So I was a diver, did underwater demolition for a while, and rode submarines because they were highly technical. There was always new things to learn, and so it kind of captured me.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, there was a lot to do at first, but after a while, kind of punching holes in the ocean was you were out of sight, out of mind, and but it was just a different way to live, and it kind of fit me.
Did you ever find, now I've been on a couple submarines, and I mean, I'm a 6-7 foot male, so I'm not really fit to be on one, but was it very claustrophobic for you, or was it almost kind of just a natural experience?
No, I didn't find it claustrophobic at all, but I mean, being a Navy diver and also being on a submarine, you just can't be claustrophobic, and they do a lot of testing to make sure that people are going to be fit for that kind of duty. I found it to be, just like living every day.
Huh. Well, that's always interesting. I mean, I think that alone, if we were only going to say that that's all you did in this world, I think it's enough, because that's an amazing feat. But then you go on to train narcotics and bomb-sniffing dogs for the U.S. Coast Guard. How did that start about?
Well, after I got out of the Navy, I, for a while, was working at the Undersea Research Center, which was at the University of Connecticut, and there was a need at the time for some experimental work to be done with counter-narcotics dogs, and because I had previous experience working with dogs, I kind of got tapped out for it, and so it just became another thing that got, it was the right place, right time kind of a thing, and there I was, and so they had a need, and I was able to fulfill it, so I found myself kind of on loan to the Coast Guard, and that's what we did.
Man, that is just absolutely remarkable and amazing. And again, we could say that if that was it, it would still be enough. But you have continued to just reshape everything when it comes to research. And that's what drew me to you originally, because I was like, wow, I mean, you have been doing a lot of amazing work. Now, you're at the University of Cincinnati, and you do stuff at FETCHLAB. Now, FETCHLAB and your investigations are for different things. Now, I'm really curious to know a little bit about different things. One is animal and audiology. Boy, animal audiology. That just kind of wouldn't slide off the tongue there. What is that study kind of focused on?
All right, well, when I came on faculty at the University of Cincinnati, all faculty members that are in the tenure track have to be able to teach, but we also are responsible for doing research. And I decided that I'm in the College of Allied Health Sciences and medical education, And so as far as allied health goes, the department I'm in is audiology and speech pathology. So I decided that I would take a try of molding together the work that I have done over the years with animals with human audiology work. And so what I found was that there are not a lot of people that understand animal hearing like we understand human hearing. And I also found that, you know, for MDs and vets, we don't get trained in audiology. We hear about it, but we don't really, you know, we're good at pathology of the ear, but not really good at audiology of the ear. And so my thought was at the time that if we could learn enough about animal audiology, then an audiologist could work with a veterinarian in the same way that they would be working with an ENT in the medical community. So I started FETCHLAB, and we were starting just to do puppy testing, and then it just kind of blossomed out because it was a new frontier, and we're seeing puppies every week, and then because of the experience that I've had with exotic animals, we branched out into exotic animals, and sooner or later, Uncle Sam caught up with me and said, hey, you know, we have a need because we have military working dogs, so we kind of branched out there, and that's FETCHLAB.
Man, I mean, I can say this. I have read a different papers that you've done. I've read a lot about FETCHLABs, and honestly, for anybody who doesn't know about your work, I mean, you are on the cutting edge of everything when it comes to canine hearing. You are right there. I mean, honestly, I think that you can be the one single-handedly to actually identify and at least make the corrections and bring the hearing problems back to where at least they can hear us almost in a human state. Where I think that your work is amazing, and it's so amazing. It's so just awesome to be able to talk to you about this. So, hearing management in canines, what is it that really we need to be focused on, and what are some of the things that people just aren't talking about?
I guess, you know, from as far as hearing management goes, first of all, up until the point where Dr. George Strain at Louisiana State and some other people at Auburn and you know, started recognizing the fact that there's a fairly robust amount of congenitally deaf dogs, which actually, you know, started out when 101 Dalmatians came out. People don't really even today think very much about what an animal can hear, you know, because we tend to focus on our pets and even working dogs on more of diseases, you know, and things of that nature. And this is not uncommon even with people. People generally don't worry much about their own ears in audiology until suddenly they find out that they need a hearing aid or something like that. You know, kind of noise and sound is kind of on the low end of the totem pole. So as far as dogs are concerned, I guess the biggest part about hearing management is being vigilant. So dogs, just like humans, suffer the same consequences and the same hearing losses as a human would be, whether that's because the dog is exposed to high noise, like dogs that are constantly in a kennel, or that hunting dogs or military dogs. The hearing loss is the same, even to the point that dogs will get what we call presbycusis, or deafness with age, which is the same thing that a human undergoes, and they are remarkably very similar to one another. So the first thing is vigilance. What I find here in FETCHLAB, when we have older dogs that come in and the owner wants us to test their dog, is that typically the owner will call me up and and make an appointment and say, well, I think Fido is not hearing well. He's not responding to the doorbell, or he's not responding when we come home. He sleeps, and we kind of walk right over him. He doesn't even know we came home. And so at that point in time, generally when we test these dogs, we find out that, the dog has a hearing loss. Now, if it's a hearing loss due to age, which is most of the time what happens with pets anyway, it's just that this dog has been going deaf for some time, but the owner is not aware of it. And that happens with people. Deafness with age, it's not like a broken bone. Nothing hurts. There's nothing there to tell you, hey, I'm losing my hearing. So what happens is that this happens over a long period of time with the dog slowly losing its ability to hear. And then by the time the owner recognizes that the dog is not hearing, the dog already has a hearing loss, and sometimes significantly so. Since veterinarians are not audiologists, if you take your dog to a vet and say, geez, I don't think the dog can hear, the vet is likely to give it a test where there's either a clicker or keys or whatever, something to see if the dog responds to the sound. But the only true way to know what the dog can and cannot hear is to run a diagnostic bear test, not a puppy screening, but a diagnostic test. So what I would say to owners is, one, you have to be vigilant. The signs will start to show early on, and deafness with age is going to take a while to happen. It just doesn't happen overnight. There is a such thing as sudden deafness, but it's pretty rare by comparison to presbycusis or deafness with age. The other thing is, if your dog is being subjected to noise, that is, if you hunt with your dog, or the dog is spending a lot of time in a kennel with other dogs, whatever the noise issue may be, you find out that this will bring on deafness, in more of a rapid way. So I think that vigilance is the first thing. And then once you do start to think that you see the signs, then you need to take the dog into your veterinarian, let the veterinarian know, and hopefully the vet will either test, although most vets don't have the wherewithal to do diagnostic or threshold testing, or to come someplace like FETCHLAB where we can do diagnostic and threshold testing, because we're audiologists. So that's the biggest thing. If the dog has enough residual hearing, and this is the same as it is for a person, and the dog gets tested early, then there are some things that can be done. For instance, we put hearing aids on dogs, and one of the research things that we're doing right now is to try to develop a specifically canine hearing aid that will be affordable by most people. They're very expensive right now because they're not specifically made for canines. But the deal is, be vigilant, watch your dog, notice the signs, take the dog to the vet, try to get it tested, and then you go from there.
Now, when you say diagnostic test, I'm very, very interested, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are wondering the same thing. What is the actual course of action that you take with this diagnostic test?
Well, the long and the short of it is, when we screen puppies, it's a go, no-go test. So we run the test, and either the dog fails and it can't hear, or it gives us the right waveforms that say, yeah, the dog can hear. When we run a diagnostic test, we have to run it at a lot of different frequencies and intensities to determine exactly what the dog can hear. So it's not just a screening. It's not a no-go, no-go. It's, okay, we're going to test a lot of different avenues to determine exactly what the state of the right and left ear are.
Right. Now, when you mentioned, of course, hunting dogs, and the other one that comes to mind is service dogs that are in the military, specifically puppies that are being trained to not be affected by the sound of gunfire or bombs, stuff like that. is there any kind of dog PPE that's out there right now that's available to kind of protect their hearing at such a puppy age?
Well, actually, one of the research things that the government has us working on, and we're very close to being able to put it out, is a hearing protection device for dogs, and we've developed two of those hearing protection devices. One once we have it up and running in the government will probably be available to any pet owner. It's a pullover snood that attenuates the sound, and you could put it on your dog, say if it was noise phobic or 4th of July or whatever the case may be. The other one is a little bit more technologically advanced, and it's an in-ear thing. But yeah, those are coming, and the reason for that, again, that's how I got involved with Uncle Sam kind of calling me back out of retirement. We need your help here, is to actually develop these devices so that because the dog's hearing weren't being protected, and if you're going to send the dog to do military work, and you want to extend the life of that animal being able to work in a noisy environment, and the environment is not so much just, has to do with explosives and gunfire, but it also has to do with, you have dogs that are flying in helicopters, and it's very loud in there, and most of them and all of the people are wearing hearing protection. So our charge was get hearing protection that our military working dogs could do. But I would say to you, it's not just military working dogs. If you have a dog that, say, I don't know, a search and rescue dog or a cadaver dog or whatever like that, and the dog starts to get older, you can extend the life of this dog in its working environment by being observant and using hearing protection devices and being knowledgeable about what's going to give the dog a hearing loss. So, it's a life work extender for sure.
Absolutely amazing, and just so interesting to really think about it to such a high degree, because honestly, majority of people are not thinking about it from that perspective, and thinking, well, dogs' hearing is protected. I mean, yet the decrease of their hearing is going to be a lot quicker than ours because of how they age quicker, and the fact that, well, some that are working are going to have a lot more trauma on their ears. So that is just absolutely amazing to think about all that.
Sure.
Now, animal vocal mechanisms. I'm like I said, I'm absolutely fascinated by you and your work. So being able to understand all this stuff is just it's almost kind of a geek out moment for me. So bear with me as I kind of nerd out when I get to talk to you about this. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people, and what's fun is a lot of our listeners are in the medical community. And so I'm pretty sure they're geeking out at the same time. So what goes into animal vocal mechanisms?
A lot of that research was because I have students, PhD students, that want to get into animal audiology or bioacoustics, and so a long time ago, oh boy, it's got to be, I would guess maybe 20 years or more ago, I linked up with a gentleman by the name of he's in right now in the University of Kentucky, Mike Johnson, and he's a computer. He actually now is the chair of electrical and computer engineering, and so he got a National Science Foundation grant. They were working, his students were working with voice recognition and what have you, and so then he got the idea, and we got together and said, well, what if instead of doing human voice recognition, what if we did it with animals? And so to apply that technology. And so we started out with elephants, and then we went on to other animals. And what it's all about is basically when animals make sounds, whether they're for communication or otherwise, they have a repertoire of sounds that they can make, but what distinguishes one from another and what behavior might be linked to it. So we started to take many, many thousands of samples of sounds. We started out with elephants because we had them available, and they were pretty easy to get recordings from. And then his group takes that and puts it into a computer program that looks intently at the sound and tries to bin out. So if I give the computer, as an instance, a training set and say, here's a sound from a dog, and this sound is only made when the dog is hungry, or this is when we've seen it made, and then I needed 1,000 other sounds, the computer will look to see whether those sounds sound the same as the one that I said was relative to feeding. And if not, it'll start to categorize them into different places, and eventually it will be able to tell me, well, okay, this bin over here looks like things that didn't look like they were feeding, but you seem to indicate that they had something to do with play, for instance. And so in time, and with thousands of these things being put in, the computer brings us a little bit closer to kind of understanding what these sounds might mean to the animal. So we started with elephants. We're right now working with Asian small-clawed adders. But we also tried some work on beluga whales up in the St. Lawrence River estuary. And it's just all about learning about animal communication, animal sounds in general, but using the technology that we have for voice recognition to be able to sort that out.
Wow. That, when you think about it in a whole, I mean, I know that the tones on different animals, especially sea, whether it's a whale or a dolphin, do have different tones to it. But to be able to narrow it down and identify it, that's just beyond science. I mean, that is taken it to another level. That it's interesting to think that there is a sound of, obviously, mating sounds and hunger sounds and even anger, and any kind of articulation of vocalization is just, it's amazing to think that you spent so much time narrowing everything down just to a tone, and all it just takes most likely is a slight tone down or up to be able to articulate the different wants or needs of that particular animal. Just absolutely amazing.
Well, that's where the machinery comes in, and Mike is the whiz that did all that. So it turned out to be a good collaboration, and we are still collaborating even today. As I say, we're doing some work with the Asian small-clawed otters right now, but it's just a matter of, can you use the technology to your benefit to find out a little bit more than we knew before? And certainly, classifying animal sounds is not something that anybody is particularly good at. There are different ways, and different people have done it different ways. We happen to be using, the technology of, the Bluetooth and whatever, and computers to be able to help us with it. And the computer struggles with some things. Is a dolphin whistle and a beluga whistle, are they different? Or is a whistle a whistle a whistle? And, the machine can be confused too, but I think that every year, we get a little bit closer to knowing a little bit more for the species that we're looking at, being able to identify the species and, perhaps maybe even, what gender they are. We're getting closer, and I suspect we will continue to do that over the years.
That's just absolutely amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Now, your current studies, one that I think is absolutely amazing and something I'm very interested in is the PTSD in military working dogs. What do you see as the post-traumatic stress disorder in a working dog, a military working dog, that you're actually seeing more as a common than not? And talk us through what the whole process of the study is.
Okay. I can't talk too much about the process of that, but I can tell you that any dog, working dog, can suffer PTSD just like a human, or what we call PTSI now, just like a human can. One of the things from an audiological point of view that we see that is either from that or maybe even sometimes noise-phobic dogs is the fact that the dog may become hyperacusive, which means that sounds that sound normal to everybody else are annoyingly loud to the animal. And that goes for people too. They get through hyperacusis. It sometimes can lead on to auditory hallucinations. We are experimenting with some tests, notably a test called mismatch negativity that tests a person or an animal's echoic memory. So if I provide for you a standard set of tones that all sound the same, and then suddenly, randomly, there is a deviant tone in there, if your brain says, whoa, wait a minute, this is not a standard tone, this is not something I remember, then on an EEG, I can see that. And that tells me that, yeah, your head is able to, to tell that there's something different here from a sound point of view. If you can't do that, then there's a problem. And it's either because there's something traumatic that has happened or there's an audiological problem, specifically hearing loss or something like that. But if it goes along with a hyperacusis, then we have a pretty good idea that there's been some trauma somewhere along the line, and so it's we can follow up on that. And we don't know what to do about it exactly yet, but that's kind of where we're working through.
Just one of those things that to be able to understand the patient in this current circumstance is really what you're trying to narrow down. Now, with high stress situations, do you think that it's a little bit more likely for a working dog, to suffer trauma and stress because of the nature of being a dog, or is it just something that's just natural and has not much of a differential between a human and a dog?
I'm going to say that's a question I don't know that I can answer.
I'm really happy I could ask something that would have that effect.
Yeah, I mean, you got a good point there, but I really don't know how to answer that question.
We'll just table that for a future study then. I always look at dogs and I know that they can stress out a lot easier than a human, but then again, when you think about it, a dog will suffer from anxiety in a crowd. I saw it yesterday when I was in downtown San Francisco. I saw this German Shepherd walking, and there was a lot of people, and you could just tell that the amount of people overstressed the dog, which, I mean, I could put into the same context as people who have a phobia of being around a lot of people as well. So I was wondering, is there anything that would kind of mirror that? But, I guess that's for a study that could be done down the road because, it's possible.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this is, the testing that we do, which is one of the things that got me started in FETCHLAB, the testing that we do, the technology that we use was all originally designed to test human hearing. And specifically, the bear testing that we do was originally designed and is still used in hospitals across the world to test infant hearing when a baby is born. Some of these other tests, like the mismatch negativity that I was just telling you about, are also, these are human tests, but the whole point of FETCHLAB is that we found that these tests can not only be run on humans, but they can be run on other animals. We're even running some of these tests on animals that are not mammals. We have been testing shark rays, reptiles. So the deeper you delve into this, the more you find out that, we're not actually so far apart. One of the courses that I teach talks about the evolution of hearing as it came from dinosaurs to the present day. And the human ear, and by virtue of the human ear changing, the brain and the vocal systems both chained together has evolved, tremendously. But most of what we do is just taking advantage of human resources, human testing equipment, and then orienting it towards, okay, what will this mean to an animal? Because all ears, at least mechanically, are not equal.
You bring up a question that's odd, and I would need somebody of your brain capacity to kind of dissect this. You mentioned dinosaur, and again, that's one of my most favorite topics out there. Without being able to have a sample to be able to test, would you say that the hearing on a dinosaur would be pretty similar to a reptile, or do you think that the structure would have been even more complicated, or how would you identify that?
Right. Trying to think about dinosaurs and hearing is really conjecture at best. I mean, we only have the fossil record to go through, but if you look overall at the progression of hearing, and you take what we have in the fossil record, and you look then at reptiles, and you look at birds, what you find out is that there's a lot of similarity there. There's a similarity between a reptile and a bird that makes them almost identical, and some of that throws back and looks like, quacks like some of the things we find in the fossil record. So, when you look at fossils, the folks that are actually down working on it, we tend to look at digs and we find bones and stuff. Well, one of the bones that gets found periodically is the bones of the ear. So you find out that, reptiles do have ossicles, and so do birds, but they have changed slightly with a bird, but they're very reptile-like. And then if you look at some of the fossil record for dinosaurs, you go, well, dinosaur looks a lot like a bird, looks a lot like a reptile, too. So you have, and again, it's conjecture, but you have there are some clues. They're sketchy, but there are some clues that lead us up this path to how the ear has evolved.
Just absolutely amazing. I mean, I've definitely read a lot of different things that link birds and reptile to dinosaurs, and I find that to be absolutely interesting in itself. And without being able to really be able to have a real sample, we really can't dive into it, which I'm pretty sure you would love to be able to have a sample to work on. I know I would love to be able to watch that.
Yeah, I wish I did, but yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Unfortunately, no, and Jurassic Park is just a movie, so I only can look at it from that, wondering, if only I could play with one of those. So, diver audiology, again, everything that you do, it's so amazing and so complex. You can simplify everything in the best way. Me, I'm just going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I would just love to spend the entire, probably year talking to you about all this, and envy all of your students who get to hear you on a daily. So kind of walk us through diver audiology.
Well, one of the things that everybody knows from the time that we're little and we go into a swimming pool is that the human ear is not designed to hear underwater.
Right.
Which is pretty cool, because the fully aquatic ear, that is for whales, dolphins, and some other fully aquatic animals, is designed to hear underwater, but also hears above water as well. So the question becomes, if you're a diver and you have a need, you're a working diver or whatever, you have a need to be able to communicate. And most times nowadays, we do that by a DICOM unit that's in the diver's mask. But how intelligible are sounds underwater to alert you to things, or to, even to communicate? So we started to do some audiological tests with various different divers in the water at different depths, because it affects the ear, of intelligibility. And that involved basically what's called a Whippy test in audiology, where the diver is shown a picture of something, or he listens to something that describes a picture, then he has to go to another window and pick out that picture from a group of pictures, which indicates that he understood what he heard or he understood what he saw. All of this is just in the vein of how can we enhance a diver's ability to, work in an undersea environment and be able to be self-aware or aware of sounds that are around him that may preclude him being able to do his job or have fun if you happen to be a sport diver, and that's kind of where that went.
But see, it's a need that I don't think a lot of people really realize is there. And I mean, can you imagine if we could have, and again, maybe this is a little bit too sci-fi, but can you imagine having an operation where you could actually have that ability to hear underwater and above water, and how that would enhance anybody? And I mostly use divers, especially in the military, who do a great deal of work, who could use that ability, who could be able to articulate different things that are underwater and say, okay, this is happening, and use it to their advantage. It's awesome to think about the whole process.
Yeah. Well, water changes everything, The speed of sound generally in air around 343 to 350 meters per second. You get in water and it's 1,500 meters a second. And the human ear, nor the human brain, is very good at responding to that. But we do know that there are some frequency enhancements that happen underwater. So the question is, especially for a working diver, can you take advantage of those things? To help the diver out? And I don't know what will come of that from, certainly not from the sport diver community, but hopefully, salvage divers, military divers, we might find out a little more that might enhance their ability to work in deeper depths.
That would be absolutely just amazing for anybody in that realm, because they're going to need it, or well, they do need it. Let's put it that way. They do need it. So there is a need for it, which I think a lot of people always say, is there a need for this particular study? And in this case, well, there is.
Yeah, I can tell you as a former Navy diver, there definitely is.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you would know more than any of us, so that's why you can speak from experience, where a lot of scientists would be able to say, well, here's what I know from the data. You're saying, okay, here's where it is from data and from personal experience. So that's understandable.
Pretty much, yeah.
Hearing protection devices for working dogs, including with wideband communication devices. What, in a nutshell, is that study referring to?
There are certain instances where a dog handler, whether it be a person that's just got a hunting dog or whether it's a working dog, wants to be able to communicate directly with the dog. And we know that it can be done. We now, and for some long time, have been making hearing aids where you have a hearing impaired person in your class, and they'll have something called a Roger pen that the instructor wears, which communicates with the hearing aid. And hearing aids are getting way, way, way out technologically to the point where now we have hearing aids that will tell you your heart rate and all kinds of other things. But the key with the dogs was, can I talk to my dog directly? So we know we can do this with a hearing aid. The question is, can we make this practical and feasible for a dog that, say, is going to be working in front of the handler, say, 30 yards, where we're going to be able to, talk directly to the dog's ear and give verbal commands. And it sounds like it should be pretty easy. It's actually not that easy, because once a dog gets out of range, right now we're constrained by range, and is the dog in the line of sight or is the dog out of the line of sight? If you have a rescue dog that's, going into rubble, you may lose it. So those kinds of technologies are things that we are currently working on to overcome and stabilize so that dog handler commands at distance will become a reality.
It's so amazing when you even think of it this way. Yes, when a dog gets too far out of sight, of course they're not going to be able to hear, especially depending on whatever range of sound is around it. It's going to amplify in. I think that it's one of those things that you probably, and quote me if I'm wrong on this, but I would imagine the studies you're doing on dogs must make a massive difference on humans as well. There must be a lot of similarities and a lot of different things that you're able to share with the actual hearing of a human and kind of counterbalance both of them together.
Yeah, that's one of the things that has always drawn me to these things is that when I originally started doing this, it was about what can we learn from dogs that's going to help human hearing. And then in the course of years of working in FETCHLAB, it kind of reversed. It was, okay, well, we know a bunch of stuff about human hearing. How do we turn that around, and what does it mean to the animal community? And so nowadays, this goes back and forth. We're using human equipment to test animals, but then, and I think this is kind of a comical thing to me, but it is really true. So the students that I have are mostly all students that are working on their clinical doctorate in audiology. It's called an AUD, Doctor of Audiology. And so they're used to working in a clinic with people. With whether they're geriatrics or whether they're middle-aged people or even infants. And so when they run these tests, because we've been doing these tests for so many years, we have a really good idea about what the test should look like for a normal infant, a normal adult, male or female, or a child. And so, they get to the point where they're doing this, and they're doing it every day, and they're good at it, but they know it from the standpoint that you walk in, you set the equipment up, you do it this way, and there you go. What I find is that when they want to get certified in animal audiology and they come down to FETCHLAB, that suddenly they find out, well, guess what? If you have a dog, there are lots of what we call normative data or norms that people have taken over the years, but people have done the test different ways. There's nothing that is universally accepted as a norm. And if you're an audiologist and you hook up a dog, you start getting waves that you're not really sure whether they're real or Memorex. Now, you start to do something like that with something like an elephant who can hear in the infrasonic range, and Houston, we have a problem because they've never seen anything that looks like that. In fact, most of the time, a lot of the animals we test, and we are testing elephants right now, the elephants have not been tested down into the infrasonic range. We're just starting to do that where the elephants hear seismic frequencies. Well, you look at an audiogram for an elephant, and you're totally lost because there's nothing like it on the planet. If you look at one for a dolphin, there's nothing like it on the planet. So it makes an audiologist work kind of tough because animals are going to give us different results than humans, to some extent, at least. And so it's always a kind of a chuckle for me when I get my AUD students down there in the FETCHLAB and they're going to run a puppy or something for the first time, and then, the waveforms show up on the screen and they're like, well, what do I do with that? And I'm like, well, this is why you have to know your animal and you have to know your equipment and you have to know exactly how everything functions, because it's going to give you an answer, but whether that's the true answer, only you're going to be able to tell that by experience and running massive numbers of tests on animals and learning each individual animal. So we do a lot with dogs because there's a need. I have 3 FETCHLABs, one in University of Northern Colorado, one in Akron, and the one here at UC, which was the original one. And everybody, is mostly doing a lot of dog testing. We're the only ones that do military and exotics. And exotics are hard because you don't know what you're going to get. So I think that's sort of what sustains me too, because I like new and different things that we've never seen before. And every day with testing everything from a rhino to you name it is a whole different day. It's all brand new.
Well, I imagine exotics would have to be a huge challenge. I mean, just the fact that everything about them does range to be different, and their different needs are going to definitely differ from what a dog is going to be. I mean, that's got to be challenging, but very interesting at the same time. And again,
absolutely.
Working with technology, I mean, it sometimes does fail us. We have to resort to ourselves and our own knowledge, which sometimes I think we could say doesn't happen because we're so codependent on our phones, our computers, all of our devices. We're so dependent on them to give us the accurate reading that we're not using our own brain to come to that conclusion. So I can imagine that would be difficult as well.
Oh yeah. It's an eye opener, and especially like you say with exotics, because they have, depending on what they are, they have much different hearing ranges, hearing thresholds. Like I say, with the elephants, you're talking about an animal that is basically hearing things that we don't have the capacity to hear. We're talking seismic frequencies here. And so it makes a great deal of difference, but it's almost a fantasy, It's just everything is brand new every day,
and that is what probably gets you to wake up every day, is to say, what am I going to learn today?
Oh yeah. There's never a day that goes by that we don't get something that we're scratching our heads and looking at and saying, okay, how do we make sense out of this? You're absolutely right.
And you know what? That's the funny part here is that, here we have somebody who is not only an amazing mind, and that alone, distinguishes you for who you are, but you're one of those unique minds that says, I'm still looking to fuel it. I want to still learn something. I want to wake up today and find out something I didn't know, where I'll be honest, and I know you know this as well, there's a lot of people who say, I've learned what I need to learn, and now I'm going to teach, and there's nothing more for me to learn. Those are the ones that scare me.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, that is, I have to say that a lot of my inquisitiveness and whatever, and even to the point of starting this lab, was when I was a PhD student. I was in the animal sciences department, and I decided to go over and visit audiology one day, and I met this guy by the name of Dr. Frank Music, who is very well known in the audiological field, and so I asked him about, doing some research with him and beluga whales, and he kind of, beluga whales? Well, then he countered back with, well, what do you know about, Lombard reflex? And I was like, I don't know anything about Lombard. What are you talking about? And that really was the beginning of, he opened my eyes to, we know a lot of stuff, but we don't know a whole lot more stuff than we know. And so once you get hooked on that, it's very addictive to constantly want to, look more and more. That's why these really heady, like, super people like Stephen Hawking and, these guys that are just out there because they just have a thirst for wanting to know more. There's, like, never enough. You got to know more. And, honestly, just like you said, that's what drives me to work every day, that and my students.
See, I honestly, from what I've read about you, and I say this seriously, Stephen Hawking was always one of those minds that will never be able to really hone in on and understand. And I say the same thing with Steve Jobs. They were unique minds. But with your experience and what you've done and everything that you're doing, you're right in that same conversation. You have done things that nobody has done, And for that, you definitely get to be in that conversation with them, and that's what makes this whole conversation such an honor, because you are of that same group, and it's a small group.
Yeah, well, I don't even know how to respond to you. That's very nice of you, but I think that, there are people that we don't even know, and there will always be people with a thirst for knowledge who are going to rise to the level of where, we help animals, but we try to also help people. Right. There are people out there that we don't even know that are doing this every day that are, undoubtedly much smarter than I am, much more on the ball, and probably more so than even Mr. Stephen Hawking and Mr. Jobs, too. So, we don't sell each other short, because it's all a matter of how curious you are, I think.
Right. And, this is where curiosity kills the cat completely does not apply.
You got that right.
Now, you had mentioned different what you were talking about with the lumbar. And now, is this how you became an instructor for head and neck gross anatomy?
I did that because I was doing work, before and after I got out of the Navy. I was doing work with technology with marine mammals, and we wanted to know, what do they hear, and how do they echolocate? How does this whole sonar thing work? And so there's no model for hearing, or at least there wasn't then any kind of a model for hearing in dolphins or other marine mammals. And so one way to do that would be for me to go to school and learn about the ear and otology and audiology. And so, yeah, that's what brought on the whole head and neck thing. And even to this day, here at the university, I teach head and neck and gross anatomy.
I can honestly say, and I'm sure you're not going to give me a clear answer on this one, but when you're doing a conference or you're in a room with some other peers, I guarantee that they must come up to you and just say what an honor it is to meet you, shake your hand, and how it is just your work is above and beyond what drives them to want to be who they are. I know you won't answer that correctly and tell me it happens all the time, but I can't imagine it doesn't happen.
It actually doesn't. I mean, one of the things that's, at least here at the University of Cincinnati, your colleagues, everybody's working on something different. And here in the health field, boy, we have people working on everything from cancer to you name it. And, I'm just awed by my colleagues and the things that they do. I mean, yeah, I'm outside the box here because nobody does animals, and we do. And it's a niche that I've found. So, yeah, that's kind of a little bit unique, but wow, I mean, these guys, they're all over everything, and it was that way at the University of Connecticut too. It's sort of like I think about Apollo 13 when they were all stuck up there, and Tom Hanks said, they got half the PhDs on the planet working on this thing. Well, that's kind of what I get to experience every day. It's awesome.
Oh, but that would be just, I mean, come on. And that's not a job. That's a gift right there.
Oh, yeah.
That is amazing. Now, again, you do so much and you've done so much. But, we were talking about this a few weeks ago before we recorded, and you were saying how, you had to be in class and you had to teach later on in the day. So being an assistant professor of audiology in College of Allied Health Science, I mean, your students are just so fortunate to be able to consume your knowledge all the time. I mean, how lucky is it to be in your class?
Well, I got told this a long time ago, and I truly believe this. And in various different things that I've done here at the university, including, my annual review and everything that they ask you about, your theories of teaching and whatever. There is no greater satisfaction for a teacher of any grade level than that the point when your student surpasses the teacher, then you can sleep well at night because you've done your job. And I have had a number of students. There's one that is directing the FETCHLAB at Akron right now that has way surpassed me. And, that's a good feeling. I can go home with that. I can sleep well at night with that because, I've done my job, and that's always going to happen. If it doesn't happen, then, as we say in the Navy, you're not doing it right.
True. So I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you what your biggest accomplishment has been.
Wow. Well, the establishment of FETCHLAB is probably my biggest accomplishment because it came out of nothing, and now it's just we are going into the veterinary community, the medical community. We're helping animals of all different species. I don't see that I could do any more.
You know what? I can see where that would be your baby, and I can see that it's a continuing growing child that's probably at this stage you would call it a teenager or an adult, but still, I mean, you're always nurturing it. So I can see that. I can definitely see that. Biggest issue that you see in the science community in this current topic, do you have anything specific that is the biggest issue?
Well, I think aside of just trying to get things going and really expanding animal audiology, I think that we're going through some of the same growing pains that audiologists have gone through over the years in human medicine, and that is trying to get the medical community and the audiology community to come together because doctors get taught differently than they don't get taught audiology, and audiologists don't really get the otology end of it. And the same way is with vets. Until the day that animal audiology is established and veterinarians are using us more and more, there's a bit of a mountain to climb here. Change is not always well received, but it's not insurmountable either. And in my estimation, this will happen in my lifetime.
So I love this question that I ask everybody, and I love it from the great minds. I'm always curious what puts you on a soapbox, that moment that you want to go up there and preach something and just try to teach something or open up the eyes of anybody in the room. What gets you on a soapbox?
Oh, wow. Probably, I do a lot of talking about hearing protection and noise. Because not only animals, but it started out with people. Working in a noisy environment, being subjected to noise, whether it used to be people worried just about it, for all the people that are working in a factory and, they can lose their hearing. Well, nowadays with social noise, whether it's iPods or whether it's, shooting or whatever the case may be, we're losing a lot of hearing in the animal world and in the human world because of that. And I think that people generally are not that aware of it. Again, because it's not like a broken bone. It doesn't hurt. Nobody's going to care until they wake up one day and they can't hear, or they find out that their dog can't hear, or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I guess it's the I guess the noise aspect really, gets me. I wind up having to tell people over and over again, it's not loudness that just makes you not be able to hear. It takes three things, and you can't toss up one for the other. You have to, the noise has to be in a frequency that you can hear. It has to be loud enough to do damage, and you have to be subject to it for enough of a duration of time that it will do damage. And that is a message that is just, I've found extremely hard to get out to people, much less animal caretakers or owners. So yeah, I guess that gets me going, as you can see.
Yeah, that's what I like. I like the passion. That's where that question has always been able to bring out the passion, and I love that because it's true and it's natural, and that's the best. Well, is there anything that we did not cover that should have been covered?
I think you've covered more than I ever dreamed was going to be covered here. So I think you got it right on the head, and I think it's a good thing that you have these podcasts because I think there are so many people out there that that have questions and maybe have no place to go. I've just recently answered a number of questions from people who have dogs that needed to have medications and stuff, and we come to find out that a lot of the medications that we use in the dogs here are ototoxic. They can drive the animal to hearing loss, and we know that even in the pediatric community. For years, we gave scripts out for ear infections or whatever that are ototoxic, and so now we have to be careful of that, and it's something that we don't think of. So I think you're doing a great thing by having different points of view, different people come around. I mean, when I first read your thing, I was like, really? Okay, well, this is pretty cool, but I never thought that it would be anything that I might be able to partake in. So I'm very grateful and thankful to you for including me.
Well, you know what? That's an absolute honor, and one of the greatest comments that I've ever heard, and I appreciate that. Anytime you have anything you want to talk about, please feel free. I love having this conversation. I'd love to have more with you. Is there any way that anybody can get in touch with you and ask you any questions?
Sure. I mean, people can always email me, or they can give me a call at this number, and I will respond back to them. Also, FETCHLAB, I think if you go to www.fetchlab.org, you can see FETCHLAB and you can get a hold of me through that. Yes, I'm always available to answer questions. Might take me a little bit, but I don't throw anything off. If you ask me, I will eventually get you an answer, even if it's an I don't know.
Hey, you know what? That's what matters. Well, thank you, Dr. Scheifele, for being on. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. Just to be able to sit down and chat, I really appreciate this.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and again, I'm honored, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a highlight of my day.
No, it's been the highlight of my week. Well, I'm Chris Green. Have a fantastic week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, gotta go in my bedtime.